Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UXR Conversations. This was meant to be episode 10, but life happened, and therefore this is now episode 12 of UXR Conversations. I am delighted to have an amazing guest today, but first, in case you don't know me, I'm Noam Siegel. I'm Director of User Research at Wealthfront and the creator of UX Quest, which is a YouTube and a newsletter and other things. And with me today is Brad Orrego, the head of research at Auth0, not Auth0, I was told. It's Auth0, okay? Or in an American accent, Auth0. Is that a good American accent? I don't know. Not American. Brad is just like, so many other researchers I've met in my life, such an interesting person. Just reading your bio is incredible. Let me introduce Brad to you. He is a researcher, a UX leader, a mentor, a dancer, normally based in New York, but currently I think living the nomadic life until this horrible pandemic is over, hopefully soon. They spend their days building and leading the research team at Auth0, but also dancing with, is it the Sokolow theater dance group or Sokolow?
Sokolow, yeah.
Sokolow. Sokolow theater dance group and Kanopy dance companies on evenings and weekends. Brad does a bunch of other things which sound cool. Homebrewing, we should probably talk about that sometime. Haven't gotten to that point yet. Blogging about beer pancakes.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure if there was like a comma missing there. Did you mean beer pancakes or just beer and beer pancakes? Fascinating. Oh, I've lost you. Are you there?
Yeah,
I lost Brad for a
connectivity
moment.
issues, but we're back. Yeah, we're back.
Yeah.
A little spinning things. Beer pancakes. Yes, it's essentially. I mean, I'll keep it brief because we're at time. But the story goes 2011. I was like doing this brunch thing with some friends. Was looking up recipes for let's do some like pancakes and waffles and whatnot. And I couldn't find anything on the internet that was like all the beer batter or whatever was like use Coors Light, use these like generic American beers. And I was like, why would we have all this craft beer? Like I was in Wisconsin. I was like, we have, it's like beer mecca, right? So I decided to start a blog trying out a bunch of different craft beers. To see like what makes good pancakes and what doesn't. So it's literally like the website is beerbatterbreakfast.com, which is an awesome branding. I can't take credit for that. It's a friend of mine. But yeah, it's literally beer pancakes.
That's amazing. And then, so yeah, we could probably talk about these things for a while, but perhaps the most important thing about Brad is that they're also actively involved in the ResearchOps community, served on its board since 2019. The ResearchOps community is an amazing community. And we're going to talk about a ResearchOps related topic, which is Ops First, or a ResearchOps First team. So I'm very excited about this because I think that at Wealthfront and other teams I've been part of, it was more the opposites of that. I'm not sure if it's ResearchOps last necessarily, but certainly not ResearchOps first. And so I'm very excited to talk about that. We'll get to this at the end, but you can find Brad and Auth0 in a bunch of places on Medium, medium.com/Auth0 design, at Brad Orrego on Medium, and also check out auth0.com/careers because they're hiring for a bunch of roles. So Brad, I'd love to start with just hearing about your career and how you got into research in the first place, in addition to the dancing and the other things that you've been up to.
Yeah, I love when people ask this question because it's like, well, how'd you get into UX, right? It's a common question. And I have to go all the way back to when I was 17 years old, figuring out what to study in undergrad, right? So I was like, trying to pick majors. And I decided at that point that I wanted to make video games and understand people better. So I would study computer science and psychology. And I wound up at the University of Rochester because they're pretty much the only school that said, oh yeah, people double major here all the time. Come here, study both. You don't have to choose. So I said, great, decision made. Like, I'll go to Rochester. My first few years there, studying computer science, studying psychology, more or less in isolation. Got super into research on the psych side. So I have this like really deep academic background in human subjects research in academia, working with internal review or institutional review boards, IRBs, all that stuff, right? Like I have this interest, like was in the honors program, did a bunch of research there. We had a professor who's working at Kodak at the time, which is based in Rochester. There's a name we haven't heard in a while, Kodak. But so Carmen Neustatter, who's now at Simon Fraser, taught this as an adjunct professor, taught a course called Introduction to Human-Computer Interaction. And I remember like seeing that and reading the description and just being like, what is this? And why has no one ever told me about HCI? Like I'm double majoring in psychology. You'd think one of my advisors at some point would be like, oh, there's this like kind of new field called HCI. You should look into it. So
it's not that new, by the way. It's not that new.
Sort of.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, we could talk about this, but the term may be fairly new, but the practice of doing research to inform the design of technology was happening certainly mid 20th century, if not before, at Bell Labs and other places. Which is why I'm still to this day a little surprised to hear stories like yours, and I think we're about the same generation, where it just wasn't a thing. Just a decade or two ago, it just wasn't a thing.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. The date that I pick is Usability Engineering by Jacob Nielsen was published in 1993.
Yeah.
So that's like the first textbook in HCI. But anyway, like discovered HCI, fundamentally changed my career. Started doing independent like grad level coursework to really dig in there. When I graduate, I know at that point, like I want to go into UX, I want to be a designer, I don't want to be an engineer. Like, how do I do more of this? So work at a handful of startups, do some agency work. Like my early career in Madison, Wisconsin was, I sometimes, I mean, it's a true statement, but I often will joke that's like, oh, I've had exactly now 2 one-year anniversaries in my career. Like I've been in the industry for 11 years, 12 years if you count internships. And yeah, I've had exactly, Auth0 is the second company I've had a 1-year anniversary with, because I've all these startups, all these agencies, all this freelance work that, taught me a lot of things and got me a lot of exposure to how different companies work and how to structure things. But there isn't a lot of longevity there. So cut my teeth, learned very quickly. And what I sort of realized, the story I also tell is like, I was doing some design work, I was doing a little bit of front end, engineering and obviously doing research. And I would be working at a startup, 23, 24 years old. And, the CEO, the co-founder would come over and say, hey, we need you to design this thing. And I would respond, well, I need to do some research. I don't really understand, the problem space, and we should probably test this design before we build it. And they're like, no, we don't have time for that. Just design a thing and we'll go build it. So I'm looking at this co-founder, and I'm like, so you're gonna bet this like $1 million, $2 million investment on what like 23-year-old me thinks is a good idea? Don't you think we should spend a little bit? And I got so tired of having that conversation. That's like, that's it. I'm not designing anymore. I'm only doing research. And this was probably 2014, 2015. So it was also a point where like, I think there was this like shift in sort of the world where, the tech world where like, oh, now research is a thing. Now this is something it's sort of coming of age. So it was a really interesting time to make that transition, to decide, no, this is what I'm doing full time, and to really start to commit into that career path.
Amazing, fascinating story. By the way, I have to ask, I got into Rochester at the time for grad school. Did you eat many garbage plates?
A few, yeah, probably more than I should have, but
Why would a city do that to itself and associate itself with like, oh, what's your city's famous dish? Oh, it's called a garbage plate. Lovely. Really appetizing.
Probably could have used some branding help there.
Probably. But anyway, yeah, if garbage plates are something that you find interesting, a bunch of really unhealthy food all on one plate without much care for presentation, please go to Rochester, New York. It's a good place for that.
They are delicious. They're good. I mean, they're not good for you, but they are good.
Yes, and it's a great school with great
Yeah.
professors. So
Yes.
so there's that. So let's jump into ResearchOps, because that's the center of the conversation. And first of all, I'd love to get just your perspective on the evolution of ResearchOps in the past few years. It's been an amazing evolution, an amazing build-up of a community and practices and tools and just endless things going on. So I'd love to just get your brief overview before we jump into ops first, your brief overview of just the community and the practice of research ops in general.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. You know, if we go back to the sort of tweet that started this all, that Kate Tausey put out in I think March of 2018, you know, she put a tweet out and she was like, "Oh, we'll probably get, I don't know, maybe 50 or 100 people to sign up." She thought like that's the max. There can't be this many people. You know, we fast forward to now where there's I think 8,000 people in our Slack workspace.
Incredible.
So that growth is, you know, that's crazy. I joined the community in April. I forget the exact date. I looked it up, but it was April. So I was one of the, not the very first, but within the first few weeks, joined that community, got super involved in, you know, all those discussions, all the workshops, was invited to join the board, I think in early 2019, sort of when Kate was stepping away and trying to put structure in place for, you know, for the community to live on. So just the sheer growth of it has been insane. And it's actually like kind of cool to look at and say, oh yeah, like you know, one of the first hires I made at Auth0 was for ops. I hired an ops person. Like that's just a weird thing to be able to say when a few years ago, like no one, you know, maybe if you were probably doing the work, you probably didn't have the title. Like research operations was kind of a new thing. That's, you know, a big part of why I decided to take this role with Auth0 is that, you know, we've spent at that time, you know, was 2 years, it was 2020, all this time working as a community, doing these workshops, trying to figure out what is research ops, what are the sort of core, you know, the 8 pillars, that framework that Emma and co have come up with, like what is this thing and how do we do it? And my sense at the time was that we had a lot of hypotheses. We had a lot of things that certain companies were doing certain things, but no one was really doing all of it. And it's something that usually like ops comes afterwards. Ops is like, oh, we hired a bunch of researchers. Now we need to do something to have a consistent process and to make this more efficient and to take some of the workload off of our researchers' plates so that they can focus on doing research. I wanted to flip the whole script and say, well, we have essentially a set of best practices. Let's put those into place at the beginning and see what impact it has on our ability to scale, on the impact that we have on the type of research that we can do. So it's been really cool. It's been, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's and by the way, you have a hi from Vishal, who's a regular viewer of this channel, and thank you for watching, and I'm glad you were looking forward to this. So before we jump into what you did here, in case people don't know, I'd love to talk about just for a second how research ops is, you know, typically incorporated in most companies, right? Because I think to understand the ops first approach and the novelty of it, it's good to talk about the non-ops first approach, which is still, I would suggest, a lot more common. So from what you've seen, being such an, you know, a key part of this community for a while now, what's the typical way ops is incorporated, and what are some of the, you know, upsides and maybe mostly downsides to that approach?
Yeah, the way that it typically happens, and this is it's sort of a metaphor that I borrow from Tomer Sharon, who's one of my mentors, that, you know, you hire a bunch of researchers, right? Someone says, we need to build a research team, and you go out and you hire 5, 10, you know, however many researchers, and then everyone's kind of doing their own thing. And because you come in and there isn't really structure in place, there's no onboarding, you know, it's like, do what you need to do, answer these questions, right? So people come up with their own methods, their own templates, their own, you know, tools at larger companies. I was talking to Dana, who's over at American Express, and they had that problem where, like, Dana walked in as the director, a new director of research, little over a year and I mean, I don't know, but she walked into that situation where, you know, it's a globally distributed research team, so they have different tools and different teams. They all have different processes, and like it's kind of a mess. So Dana was like, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to sort of bring some consistency to this process, and there's all sorts of benefits to, you know, bringing ops in, because then you're all speaking the same language. You're all using the same tools. Your cost savings. There's efficiency benefits. There's knowledge sharing, right? Like, oh, you did some research on that. Like, that's cool. We can use some of that. So it's usually something that like you hire a bunch of people and then you go, oh, we need to fix this. Whereas, I said to borrow from Tomer's like, you hire a bunch of, researchers, and like you put a bunch of, cars and steam engine and whatnot on these tracks, and it just comes barreling through the station, everything derails, right? Instead, let's build some stations, let's lay those rails so that when you put more momentum and more people on the train, it's going to run a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, I know Tomer, that's for sure. He's in the Israeli UX research gang. It's a very small gang. We're not that many people. And also these days, I believe he's a co-founder of a somewhat still stealth company. So he's now like a chief experience officer or something. But I imagine the counter argument to his argument, your argument would be that if research ops is the kind of the mechanisms and the procedures and everything powering research, empowering research to do their work. Well, if there aren't any researchers there, then what are you doing, kind of thing. Or another pushback I think you might have heard before is executives wanting to start lean, to be lean. Let's just start with a few researchers. Let's just get things going. It's okay if we don't manage the knowledge perfectly. If we're, if we don't have all of the documents, and maybe we're not doing perfectly on the ethics side, but we'll get there. It's okay. Ethics can wait. Or participant recruitment is hard, but whatever. Like, we'll just use quick SQL queries and stick them in a spreadsheet and get to it. Let's just get to it. And also companies differ in who they are willing to let do the research, right? So I imagine research ops first works much better if a company is like, hey, we democratize research. We don't need you to have research in your title to do research. PMs do research, designers do research. And so this ops first team is empowering many individuals in the company to do research. So those are some of the things on my mind. I'd love to hear your take on those. And then bottom line, why go ops first? And is ops first the right solution for any company in theory, or really only for a specific, group of companies?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the part that you sort of added at the end, that's the argument that I typically make. Like, if you're walking into any company that has been around for any amount of time, if you're not starting from scratch, somebody's like, people are doing research, right? Whether it's the CEO, whether that's PMs, whether it's marketing, like someone is doing research already. We use the acronym like people who do research, PWDR, in the research ops world. Like, there are people who do research. Like, research to me, it is my title, but like, I don't think it's a title. I think it's an activity. I think it's something that you do. It's not something that you are, right? Like, I am a researcher. No. I do research, right? People do research. So with that in mind, and from that lens, like operations, it's like, well, people are already doing research. Sure, I could come in and I could hire some researchers, but if there's 200 people at the organization doing research, like, I hire 2 researchers, cool. Now there's a 100-to-1 ratio. Instead, if we hire ops people and we focus on operations, we can empower those 200 people to do more research. We can like increase the throughput and the amount of research. And that's actually what we've seen at Auth0. Like, we went from something like 1 study per quarter, approximately, across the entire product org, to about 1 per team, which is about an 8-fold increase. So it's like, I often joke that it's like, oh yeah, like I'm the research guy, but I don't do any research. Like, I'm leading a team, but 2, like, I'm leading an ops team right now. I'm mostly focusing on operations. So everyone else does the research. We help them through that. We guide them. We give them, tools and whatnot. We help them with recruiting. When they're done, we say, okay, cool, let's do some analysis. Let's put it in a repository. we do all of that stuff, but we're not actually doing the research ourselves.
Are there any researchers at Auth0 currently, or are you all ops people?
At the moment, we don't have any. We in the past had one. We're working on hiring sort of after we're putting those plans together right now. So like later this year, we'll be scaling up a little bit. But at the moment, yeah, it's just ops. We just have an ops team.
Yeah, and how big is the team currently? Are you able to share that?
Yeah, there's two right now. We're small but mighty. So we're working on scaling that out, but things have been shifting a little bit recently. Yeah, it happens. And to answer the other question, like, should you always do ops first? And this is something that I've sort of realized and reflected on a little bit, that actually no. There are certainly times where you'll walk into a company, you'll walk into a situation where the level of sort of understanding of research and like of research maturity for your peers, for your leaders, whoever it may be, you need that to be pretty high in order for people to understand this investment in operations, because operations is a flywheel, right? You put a lot of work in, you don't see a lot of progress. Eventually this thing spins up and you get all these returns long term. But like if you're walking into a company and they're like, what is research? Like you really need to come in and do some research, deliver that value, show the importance of it, and then say, oh, you want more of that? Cool, this is what I need. Like I need resources. We're going to do this ops thing. I'm going to empower people to do more of this thing that I just did. I'm going to teach people how to do this. But if people are just like, how does this work? Like you can't just come in and say, we're going to build an ops team. Like they don't know what research is. How are they going to know what research ops is?
Yeah. So I have a bunch of questions still, but we have a marvelous question from a member of the audience. Hi, Casey. It's great to see you here. Casey asks, how do you feel creating a research ops team first sets the stage for building out a broader research org? Great question. What's your take on that?
That's an awesome question. I think like starting ops first, there's a few things here. One, when you are onboarding researchers, they have structure to walk into, right? So you walk in on day one, you say, here's all of our tools, here's our playbook, here's our insights repository, like everything's there for you. So when you need to scale up, it's actually much easier than walking in and having to invent all those things, from scratch and just being like, I don't know, like, let's get a new recruiting tool. And we have Respondent, we have Try My UI, we have Heat, we have all these things set up already. I think the other thing that's super important is that by having the structure in place, there's a lot of clarity, right? It becomes very obvious when you have teams that are doing their own research. You can look and say, oh, they need more help, right? Like they're doing something that, the volume at which they need, or just the level of expertise, maybe they're doing a lot of diary studies or something that, you kind of need to be a researcher or have more training in research to pull off. If you're just doing usability studies and interviews, like those are great methods, but I can teach anyone to do that. Teaching someone how to properly administer a diary study, how to do the analysis on that. Like there are just instances where you'll see, they need more support. What's happening at Auth0, which is super interesting, and I didn't even anticipate this at first, is that we've done all this work. We have this ops first thing. So all the tactical research is being handled by product managers and designers, and they're focusing on their users, our customers, their specific product area. Auth0 is in a unique position because the decisions that we make and that our customers make literally impact the entire internet, right? Like Wall Street Journal, IKEA, 1-800-Flowers, like we have thousands of customers because we do authentication, we do identity and access management. Like you sign into a thing, that's what we do. But we have this ability to impact, the entire tech industry. So now my team is focusing on that consumer experience. We're focusing on, hey, how do you manage your passwords? Like, do you use Face ID? Do you use fingerprint unlock? Like, what are those things? Because we need to understand that consumer experience so that we can make recommendations to our customers to say, you're in finance. People really care about security there. You're in e-commerce. They probably just want a seamless experience, right? They want to be able to sign in, buy their thing, and get out, right? Versus if your funnel is very slippery for finance, people are like, whoa. I want there to be a little bit more control. I want there to be a little bit more security here. So we sort of put ourselves into this position where by doing this ops first thing, now we're just focused on strategic research. And it's really like, I didn't anticipate that, but I'm very happy with it.
Amazing. And thank you, Casey, for the great question. Really appreciate that. so much to think about. When you reflect on some of your successes, some of the things that you've changed because they didn't work so well when it comes to being an ops first team, talk a little bit about that. You know, we're thinking, like all of us are thinking about research ops right now, so many things. Again, how, you know, you mentioned a few of these things, how we manage knowledge, how we bring together various sources of insights and analytics and research, ethics, participant recruitment, and all of the other things around ops. So I think everyone would appreciate hearing some of your just reflections on what's worked, what didn't work so well, and you've since adjusted. And anything you can share, I think, would be very valuable for everyone watching.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, and it's something that we're constantly changing. I was having a conversation with Erica, our ops lead, yesterday or earlier this week, and she's identified like, hey, people seem to get really stuck at these 2 points in our process, right? We have a consistent process. It's a diagram and Miro, so people sort of know where it is. That actually maps to Jira. So when you create a new, you submit a request to say, hey, I want to do some research. It makes it under a Jira board. Jira automatically creates all of the subtasks to say, oh, you need to do recruiting, you need to finalize your plan, you need to execute your research, you need to do analysis. Like those are all we've automated a lot of that, which is super cool. But getting to that point, like I should pull up the two because we started with like, here's the process, and it was way too complicated. It was the process that a researcher, it was like from our perspective, like, okay, yeah, here's all the things that we need to do. And I would show that to people and they would just glaze over. They'd be like, well, I don't understand. So we simplified it down to there's 7 steps. Like, don't mind all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. Like that's stuff that we're handling and that, as a researcher, you would be going through. But for you as the consumer, 7 steps: submit your request, finalize your plan, do your recruiting. I wonder if I can do them all off the top of my head. Yeah, do the recruiting, schedule the sessions, execute them, do the analysis, and then document, right? Like that's the process, right? And that's true for pretty much anyone that does research anywhere. It's a pretty consistent thing. But I just to like reframe that to say, oh, they don't care about all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. They just care about what do I need to do and what are you going to do for me? Like so the diagram that we have very clearly lays out, like, here are our responsibilities, here are your responsibilities. If something is stuck at any point, it's either your fault or our fault. But that's something we had to figure that out. Using Jira to track the way that we used to track research projects was like in my head. People would just DM me on Slack and say, hey, we want to do some research, and I'm like, okay, cool, hold on, like I'll put something together for you. So like now, no, we have a Jira service desk that you submit a request, you submit a ticket, we go through a process there to get it into a state that we can move it into the Jira board that's in progress, and then we're actually using a separate board in Jira for our insights repository, that's like, I've been working on that blog post since UXR Conf. I'm a little bit late on that, but yeah, we use Jira to track our insights as well. And people are like, that sounds crazy. How do you do that? Why do you do that? The main reason is that everyone's using Jira, right? Like, I'm not going to say, oh, we have Enjoy HQ. Like, no, go to where the people are. People are using Confluence. People are using Jira. Use those tools. Eventually, if you need to go somewhere else, that's great. But don't introduce a new tool and a new process and a new, like, we're introducing research ops, we're introducing an insights repository at all, and to say there's a new tool for it, like, that's not going to happen. So yeah, doing those things, going to where people are, and just figuring out, something else that we've just discovered is, our teams will finish their research and just start acting on it, right? They want answers to their questions so that they can make design decisions, make product decisions, and move forward. And they're not really doing the full analysis, and they're certainly not documenting it. So now, we're saying, oh, cool, we need to actually step in and take a more active role in that part of the process as well, because people are getting stuck here, and then, like, we're never getting the insights into the repository. So we've figured it out by, a little bit of trial and error, a little bit of observation, and we've probably once per quarter or every other quarter, we do a little retro. We say, hey, everyone, let's talk about this process. Let's talk about what's working, what's not working, so that we can improve it for you.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was wondering how much internal research you do with stakeholders being an ops first team to understand what's working and what's not, and you got to that. And also think that point about meeting people where they are is a very interesting one, because we're living at this incredible time for research ops where every single month, if not week, I'm hearing about new tools coming out. I'm hearing about companies raising money for research ops tools, for insights tools. It's incredible. And for any given type of task, such as sending out a survey or managing knowledge or participant recruitment, there are now several choices we can make between tools. And there are tools that are just dedicated to that one task, right? Whereas typically when you're earlier in the evolution of something, there's one tool that does some things in a mediocre way and doesn't do other things, and was never built with the intention of being used for this research ops purpose, but it ends up being used because it is what it is. And Jira, which you mentioned, has a surprising level of flexibility if you know how to leverage it. How are you actually managing the knowledge then from all of the research? Is it also within Jira? Is it something else?
Yeah, it's mostly Jira. One thing that we haven't quite figured out yet is, we had something like 5 or 6 different survey tools. We've sort of consolidated that down to 2, but we haven't okay, so we send out surveys, we have programmatic surveys that our customer success team is running, NPS and whatnot, which we can certainly talk about NPS, but they're doing that, right? That's automated, and that goes into Salesforce, and then our customer success team does things with it, right? Like we haven't quite figured out a good way to harvest some of that information, to harvest all the conversations our CS team, our field team has. They're on calls every week with customers, with prospects. Like, they learn things, but we haven't quite figured out how to funnel that into one place. So there's certainly things that we're missing, but yeah, I mean, it pretty much all goes into Jira. Most of our teams will do their analysis in Miro, so typical, affinity diagramming and whatnot, right? Like, you throw things up there, group them into concepts, and then they'll move forward, and we'll come in and say, okay, cool, like, give us your Miro board. We will now sort of digest this into individual insights that we will put into Jira. And the way that we've structured it, like, we essentially, for those that are at all familiar with Jira, they have epics, and they have individual stories or tasks, right? So for us, every single research project is at that epic level, and then all the insights are children of that, so that you can, we've got a bunch of different ways to tag. So you can go say, okay, cool, tell me everything we've learned about this product from our enterprise customers using this method, and it will spit out all the results. But you can also say, oh, what did we learn from this one study? What did we learn from this thing? And it has all the associated insights there as well. So it's one of those things. I think you hit the nail on the head, that if you know how to leverage Jira, and I realized at some point that I've been working with Jira since 2013, before next gen projects were a thing. Jira used to suck. Jira used to be a pain to configure. It's been getting much easier and much better and much more flexible. But you do kind of have to know how to do it in order to make something like this work. But like I said, I'm working on a blog post. There will be a Miro board associated with that blog post. It's oh, here's a visual way to walk through this. Here's I think people want me to record video of it and whatnot. So that'll be coming at some point. I just don't know when I'll have time to do that.
That's great. Yeah, I think one point about Jira, kind of the broader point here, is that we work in cross-functional teams. We collaborate with PMs, designers, and others as researchers. We should learn a little bit more about the tools that they use and be better with them. I think that's helpful. It's helpful to know those tools. I, by the way, talk about meeting people where they are. I suspect that Figma, now that they're launching Miro-style collaboration tools, to my friends at Miro and Mural and other such tools, beware, because Figma is coming for you, and I'm not sure how that'll end, but Figma is an incredible tool. And if research ops teams do want to consolidate the collaboration tools and other tools, then that's something that may happen in the future. We'll wait and see. Do you use Figma for design or something else?
Yeah, our company, our team uses Figma. everyone's playing with Fig Jam. They're like, oh, look at this. You know, we used to use Mural, now we use Miro. I don't know if the whole company will go over to something like Fig Jam. The big question is going to be pricing, right? Like, what does pricing look like? I mean, there's certainly benefits to something like Fig Jam. Like, oh, all of our design components, you can just pull it into your Mural or your board, whatever, your whiteboard thing. Like, that's kind of cool.
What do they call it?
Pull it into your Miro board. Oh wait, hold on.
They can't call it a jam board, right? Because that's already a thing. So I don't know, fig jam board, or I don't know where this is going to go. But moving on to more important things, I think in the final few minutes we have, I'd love to ask you about just what are the top of mind topics for you in terms of research ops for the rest of 2021. You've been so deep in the community, you're leading an ops first team. So I imagine there are some things that's top of mind for you, and I'm certainly very curious to hear them, because maybe we should be thinking about them as well. So for the remainder of this year, where do you think the winds are blowing, and what's most important to be thinking about?
Yeah, so there's a handful of things that we've been talking about. There's work in repositories, right, and figuring out what are the best practices, what are the sort of options there. How can you structure this? There's a lot of activity happening there. I'm working on, so we're doing an annual census now for the community. So we're sort of tweaking, taking what we learned from last year, making some edits to that for 21. I know one of my pet projects that I haven't made a lot of progress on is I want to do, we've done something for what is research ops. Dave and Tuomi did the researcher skills framework. I want to do that type of workshop and analysis for like around rigor, right? Around academic rigor, around, how do we teach people the skills that they need without having to go through an entire undergraduate degree? How do we introduce these concepts like sampling bias, like ordering effects, like, statistical power, right? These concepts that if you didn't study this, you came to research from one of the myriad ways that people come to research, you may not have as much experience with that. So that's something that has been an interest of mine. I mean, I think especially in light of the year that 2020 was, there's a lot of conversation around accessibility, around inclusivity, or how do we make sure as researchers and we as operations people are really weaving that into our process, right? So one of the things that we do at Auth0 now is that every single screener that we send out has optional questions about identity, about pronouns, about native language, right? We're a globally distributed company, but we have customers all over the world. So we're like, hey, what's your native language? We can't, we'll probably do the interview in English, but it's possible we can do it in Spanish. It's possible that we can work with partners and, localize the research that we do, because you're just, the audience that you will reach, the richness of the feedback that you get is going to be fundamentally different. So I'm thinking about that in terms of like, how do I set up the operations practices such that we're getting, all sorts of different perspectives, right? We talk about inclusive design, we talk about universal design, like that. I'm done trying to sell the value of being inclusive. I'm just going to show people. I'm just going to say, oh, this is what happens if you have a visual impairment. This is what happens if you're a non-native English speaker and you're trying to understand the terms and conditions of your product, right? Like, I'm just not I'm not arguing with our designers or PMs or anyone anymore. I'm just weaving that into the research that we do, so that they see it themselves and they say, oh, we should probably fix that. So I think things like that are, certainly top of mind for me, and it's something that the community is really starting to rally around. I mean, something else, we every year, go through and sort of the board, you make a 1-year commitment. So this will be my third and most likely final year on the board. It's a lot of work, but we have a bunch of new board members. So we, they have new ideas, they have new energy. There's all sorts of stuff happening there. So I'm excited to see, how things evolve and where things go. But yeah, that's a handful of things are top of mind for us and for the community.
That's great. You're getting some positive feedback here from Vishal and Sosobit around Auth0 having one of the coolest websites. That's awesome. And I can tell you, I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, but it took me developing a pretty significant hearing impairment in my case to acknowledge the importance of being a lot more thoughtful about inclusivity in research. And I have to say that this remote situation and having headphones on all the time has made it much easier for me to exist as a researcher, as a participant in certain cases. So I love that direction for sure.
It's super interesting and something that people have had this conversation already, but how has COVID and the whole remote thing impacted research? And I think there are pros and cons, right? You don't get to like physically go and observe somebody in their workspace, and like we've lost a lot of the sort of ethnographic side of and that like observational. I mean, sure, you can like get on Zoom and look at someone's paintings, but like, yeah, you might learn something about their home. Does that really tell you much about how they work? I think the flip side of that is that the access to certain individuals, certain populations, like no longer do we have to worry about, oh, can they actually get to the office? Like, can they actually come in? How much time is that going to take them? When I got to Auth0, beginning of March 2020, I started to put together, because I've done this at other companies, I started to put together like transportation guidelines to how to get to our office in case we have people coming in to do research. And it's like, we're a remote company, but we do have a few offices around. And now it's like, transportation, like why would we? Nobody needs a transportation guide. It's just like, oh, can you use Zoom? And the number of people that are now familiar, like grandparents are now getting on. So we did a bunch of these interviews for this like biometric authentication thing, and I was talking to like 60, 70-year-old folks in Indonesia, right? Like in different parts of the world, because just the access to these populations is so much greater now because everyone's just used to doing this. So I think there's a trade-off, but to your point, like there's something that's super interesting. The other, I'll keep this brief. Speaking of not recognizing, your privilege and sort of the situation that you're in, we're back. We're having a little connectivity.
We're back. Yeah.
I saw little spinny things. I was like, I'll pause. The statistics are weird. Like, so 6 people, 3 of them were left-handed. But part of the conversation was like, oh yeah, like left-handed people have to sit, like they choose where they sit at a table very deliberately, so that they're not like, you're not knocking elbows with the person next to you. And like a few of our right-handed, folks at the table were like, what? Like their minds were blown because they just had never considered like, oh yeah, I need to think about where I'm sitting at this table so that I don't inconvenience the person next to me. And I was just like, see, that's your handedness privilege right there. Like you've never even considered what that's like. So that anecdote jumped out to me when you're talking about your own impairments.
Casey's giving a shout out to the lefties. I have some lefties in my family. Well, we love you just as much, lefties. It's just so you know. I mean, Brad, we could go on forever, and this is so interesting. Thank you so much. But we should probably end and move on to other work and other things. But before we do, is there anything else you wanted to bring up, to give a shout out, plug anything that you or your team are up to before we finish this lovely conversation?
I think there's one thing that I was going to, like, I forgot to mention when we were talking about Jira, and we'll keep this brief. One of the really cool benefits of tracking your insights in your product management tool is that you can associate insights with like design and engineering tickets. So we can actually run reports and say, oh, how many of these things going out the door have research? How much quicker were they able to implement those things because they had the research backing it up? Like there's a lot of really cool reporting capabilities there that I can serve.
That's really cool. I feel like I keep losing you now. Hello.
We're back. if you're not already familiar, like ResearchOps, also an amazing group of people, doing really great work, putting out really great content. So go join the Slack, go follow us on Medium. I think that's pretty much it. And just check us out. I'm always available. Like find me on LinkedIn. I do tons of mentorship and whatnot. So I'm always happy to help folks out. This ops thing is, I've realized that like I enjoy doing research because I hate people like wasting their time redoing things. And at that, like, so it's like, that's why I care about research, and I care about ops because it makes research more efficient. So like my entire like reason of existing right now is efficiency. And it's like, yeah, ops is cool. Ops is new. If you're new to ops, you know, come talk to me, come join the Slack community.
That's awesome. Brad, thank you so much for a great conversation. I totally agree with you that so much of what we do, it's not proprietary, it's not secret. We should be working together as a community to make research better, to make research more efficient. We have an important responsibility. We're helping to build some incredible products like Auth0. There's no reason why you should be going through this alone. I am personally for eradicating the notion of a team of one. If you think you're a team of one because you're the only research ops person or the only researcher in a company, you are not a team of one. You are part of an amazing community, and we would love to share knowledge with you and talk. So please reach out to Brad on LinkedIn or elsewhere if you want some great research ops advice. Clearly, they have it. If you want to talk to me, then I'm also available in a bunch of places, so feel free to get in touch. And as always, thank you for watching this either live or afterwards. Plenty more UXR conversations to come. But until then, thank you, have a great day, and see you next time. Bye for now.